Thanksgiving was supposed to be a time for family, gratitude, and good food. Instead, it became the day Ethan realized just how little his parents appreciated him. Ethan had been living at home for the past year, not because he was struggling, but because his parents had convinced him it was a good idea. "You'll save money," his mother, Linda, had said. "And you can help out around here, too." And he did. He covered groceries, paid the internet and utility bills, and even chipped in for unexpected expenses. His younger sister, Emma, who was still in college, never had to worry about her phone bill or car insurance because Ethan paid for those, too. He never complained. He thought he was doing the right thing. Then, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, his parents dropped a bombshell. "We're all taking a trip to the Bahamas for New Year's," his dad, Robert, announced over dinner. "We found a great package deal." "That sounds nice," Ethan said, assuming it was something they had already paid for. His mom smiled. "We just need you to send over your portion. It's only $4,000, and that covers your flight, hotel, and everything." Ethan nearly choked on his food. $4,000? He repeated. "I never agreed to this. I can't just drop that kind of money." His dad frowned. "You have plenty saved up." "Yeah, because I've been paying for everything around here," Ethan countered. "I wasn't planning on an expensive trip." His mother's smile faded. "You're always talking about how you want to travel more. Why are you being difficult?" Ethan sighed. "It's not about that. I'm happy to pay for what I use, but this is a luxury vacation I never agreed to." His sister, Emma, rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. You make more money than all of us. Stop being cheap." That stung. Emma had no job. Their parents had let her skate by without any financial responsibility. Yet somehow, he was the selfish one? "I'm not paying," Ethan said firmly. "Enjoy your trip, but count me out." That was the beginning of the end. His parents barely spoke to him leading up to Thanksgiving. And when the day arrived, the tension was unbearable. As they sat down to eat, his mother finally snapped. "Since you don't want to contribute to this family, maybe it's time you move out." Ethan stared at her, stunned. "What? You don't do enough," she said coldly. "You're not even paying for the trip. It's clear you don't care about us." "I pay for everything here," Ethan argued. "Emma doesn't pay for anything, and you've never said a word to her." "That's different," his father said. "She's still figuring things out." Ethan scoffed. "And I'm not." "We've made our decision," his mom said. "You need to be out by the end of the weekend." It felt like a slap in the face. After everything he had done for them, this was how they repaid him? Ethan stood up. "Fine," he said. "I'll leave. But don't expect me to come running back." He walked away from the dinner table, ignoring the shocked look on Emma's face. Maybe she hadn't expected it to go this far. By Sunday night, Ethan had packed his things and moved into a small apartment across town. He thought that was the end of it. He had no idea that, a month later, his family would come crawling back, desperate for his help. For the first time in years, Ethan felt free. Moving into his own place had been an adjustment, but it was a relief to be away from the constant demands of his parents. He no longer had to hear about Emma's latest needs or listen to his mother guilt-tripping him into paying for things. The peace and quiet were worth every penny he spent on rent. For a full month, he kept his distance. No calls, no texts. If his family wanted to treat him like an ATM, they could find someone else to fund their lifestyle. Then, one evening, his phone buzzed. It was his mother. Ethan stared at the screen. He debated ignoring it, but curiosity won out. He answered. "Ethan, thank God," his mother said, her voice frantic. "What's going on?" he asked, already sensing trouble. There was a long pause before she finally blurted out. "It's Emma. She made a huge mistake, and we need your help." Ethan's stomach twisted. What kind of mistake? His mother sighed heavily. "She borrowed money. A lot of money. And now she can't pay it back." Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. "How much?" His father's voice cut in, low and frustrated. 30,000. Ethan nearly dropped his phone. "What? 30 grand? From who?" His mother hesitated. "A private lender." Ethan knew exactly what that meant. "You're telling me Emma borrowed money from a loan shark?" "She was trying to help us," his mother rushed to explain. "After you left, things got difficult. We had bills piling up, and we were counting on your contribution. When you refused, Emma tried to fix things on her own." Ethan was speechless. His parents had kicked him out for not paying for their luxury vacation, yet now they wanted his help because they couldn't manage their own finances? "Why would you let her do this?" he finally asked. "We didn't know," his father admitted. "She told us she had it handled." But now they're demanding the money back with interest. If we don't pay, they're going to. His mother's voice broke. They threatened her, Ethan. Ethan felt a mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, and an unwilling concern for his sister. He might have resented how their parents treated him, but Emma was still his sister. Have you gone to the police? He asked. His father scoffed. That's not an option. These aren't people you involve the police with. We just need the money to make this go away. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. And you expect me to fix this? You're the only one who can, his mother pleaded. Please, Ethan. If you don't help, Emma could get hurt. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He hated that they were putting this on him. He hated that Emma had been so reckless. But most of all, he hated that, despite everything, he still felt responsible. I need time to think, he said. There's no time, his father snapped. They want the money in 3 days. Ethan exhaled slowly. I'll call you back. He hung up, staring at his phone. They had thrown him out, dismissed his contributions, and acted like he was the bad guy. Now, when they were drowning, they suddenly needed him. Part of him wanted to turn his back on them the way they had done to him. But another part of him knew, if he didn't do something, his sister could be in real danger. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. $30,000. His parents expected him to just hand over that kind of money as if he were their personal safety net. The same parents who had kicked him out, belittled his contributions, and made him feel like an outsider in his own family. Still, Emma's safety nagged at him. By morning, he had made his decision. He called his mother back. She answered on the first ring. Ethan. Thank God. I need to talk to Emma, he cut in. There was a shuffle on the other end, then a soft, nervous voice. Ethan, tell me exactly what happened, he demanded. Emma hesitated, then sighed. After you left, Mom and Dad were freaking out about bills. I knew they were struggling, and I thought if I could get some quick cash, I could help. A friend introduced me to someone who a loan shark, Ethan said bluntly. Yeah. Ethan clenched his jaw. And you didn't think to ask me first? I didn't think it would get this bad, she exclaimed. I was supposed to double the money and pay it back before interest kicked in. Ethan's stomach dropped. You gambled it? Silence. You gambled a loan shark's money? His voice was sharp with disbelief. It was a sure thing, she muttered. I lost. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. Of course. How much do they want now? Emma sniffled. They added interest. It's $38,000. Ethan inhaled sharply. The number just kept climbing. They said if I don't pay, they'll come after me, she continued, voice trembling. They already sent someone to my job. I'm scared, Ethan. Ethan rubbed his temple. His anger at her stupidity was battling his instinct to protect her. I'll see what I can do, he finally said. Emma gasped in relief. Thank you, Ethan. I said I'll see. I'm not making any promises. He hung up before she could respond. Ethan wasn't about to just hand over 38 grand. He needed a plan. First, he checked his savings. He had money, but not that much. And even if he did, bailing Emma out wouldn't teach her or their parents anything. Instead, he called an old friend, Darren, a lawyer who had helped him once before. Ethan. Been a while, man, Darren greeted. What's up? I need legal advice. Fast. Ethan explained the situation. Darren whistled. Damn. Loan sharks are no joke. If she signed anything, they'll use it against her. What if I don't pay? They'll harass her, maybe even rough her up. And if your parents are in the mix, they'll feel the pressure too. Ethan's jaw tightened. What should I do? There's a chance we could negotiate. Some of these guys would rather take a partial payment now than risk law enforcement getting involved. Ethan nodded. Can you help me with that? I can try, Darren said. But I'll need to know exactly who we're dealing with. Ethan exhaled. I'll find out. His plan was forming. He wasn't just going to bail them out. He was going to make sure this never happened again. Ethan wasn't about to blindly throw money at this problem. If he was going to help Emma, he needed to know exactly who they were dealing with. After leaving work early, he headed straight to his parents' house. The moment he stepped inside, his mother's anxious face greeted him. Did you bring the money? She asked urgently. Ethan crossed his arms. Where's Emma? His father, sitting in the living room, scoffed. You don't get to make demands, Ethan. If you're here to help, help. Otherwise, don't waste our time. Ethan clenched his jaw but refused to be baited. I'm here to talk to Emma. That's it. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. She walked down hesitantly, looking like a child waiting for punishment. Come on, Ethan said, jerking his head toward the door. We're going for a drive. His mother rushed forward. Ethan, just pay the money and be done with it. They're dangerous. That's exactly why I need to meet them first, he snapped. Emma hesitated before nodding and following him out. Emma gave him the address, and they drove in silence. Ethan's mind raced as he mentally prepared himself. He had no idea what kind of person he was about to meet, but one thing was certain, he wasn't going in blind. They pulled up outside a dimly lit auto shop on the outskirts of town. Ethan glanced at Emma. Stay in the car. Ethan. Stay. In. The. Car. His tone left no room for argument. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out and walked toward the entrance. The moment he pushed open the door, the scent of motor oil and cigarette smoke filled his nostrils. A large man with a tattoo-covered arm leaned against a counter, eyeing Ethan up and down. You lost, buddy? Ethan didn't flinch. I'm here about Emma. The man smirked. Ah, the little gambler. She sent you to settle her debt? Ethan met his gaze steadily. I want to hawk terms. The man laughed, shaking his head. That's not how this works. She owes us 38 grand. Either she pays, or, well, you get the picture. Ethan took a slow breath. She was stupid. I get it. But 38 grand? That's a lot of money. That's the price of stupidity, the man said with a grin. Ethan clenched his fists. What if I give you half now, and the rest in installments? The man's grin faded. We're not a bank. But you also don't want cops sniffing around, do you? Ethan countered. Let's be real. You make money by keeping things quiet. Hurting Emma doesn't get you anything but problems. The man studied Ethan for a long moment before smirking. You got balls. I'll give you that. Ethan held his breath as the man pulled out his phone and made a call. After a brief conversation, he hung up. Fine, he said. 20 grand. Paid in full by the end of the month. No excuses. Ethan nodded. Deal. As he walked back to the car, his hands were shaking. He had bought time, but now he had a new problem. Where the hell was he going to get 20 grand in a month? As Ethan got back into the car, his hands still trembled from the tense conversation. Emma watched him with wide, guilty eyes. What happened? She asked hesitantly. Ethan exhaled sharply. I got them to lower it to 20 grand. But we have until the end of the month to pay. Emma's shoulders slumped. I don't have that kind of money. No kidding, Ethan muttered, gripping the steering wheel. Neither do I. They drove back in silence, both lost in their thoughts. Ethan wasn't about to let his sister get hurt, but there was no way he was just handing over his hard-earned money without a fight. When they arrived back at their parents' house, their mother rushed to the door. What happened? I got them to agree to 20 grand by the end of the month, Ethan said bluntly. His father frowned. 20? We barely have 200 to spare. Ethan scoffed. Then maybe you should have thought about that before enabling Emma's gambling habits. Emma flinched, but their father's face twisted in anger. Watch your mouth, boy. We're family. We help each other. Ethan had had enough of the guilt trips. Oh, now you want to talk about helping? Funny how that only applies when you need something from me. His mother interjected, Ethan, please. We don't have time for this. We need to figure something out. Ethan rubbed his temples. I'll figure something out. But I'm not doing this alone. He turned to Emma. You're getting a job. Any job. I don't care if you have to work double shifts. You got yourself into this mess. You're going to help get yourself out. Emma swallowed hard and nodded. Okay. Good. Ethan turned to his parents. And you too? You better start selling whatever junk you have lying around the house. Because I'm not covering this by myself. His father's face darkened. We raised you, fed you, gave you a roof. I'm done owing you for existing, Ethan cut him off. Either help, or stay out of my way. His parents had nothing to say to that. That night, Ethan sat at his laptop, running through every possible way he could come up with the money. He had some savings, but not nearly enough. He thought about taking out a loan, but he knew better than to get himself into unnecessary debt. Then it hit him. He had a car. It wasn't brand new, but it was valuable. If he sold it, he could come up with a big chunk of the money. He hated the idea, but he knew he had to make a choice. Just as he was about to list it online, a message popped up on his phone from an old friend, Jake. Jake. Hey man, long time no see. I heard you left your old job. I might have something for you. Quick cash, no questions asked. Interested? Ethan stared at the message. Normally, he wouldn't even consider something shady. But desperate times called for desperate measures. He took a deep breath and replied, Ethan, tell me more. Little did he know, he was about to step into something even more dangerous than his sister's debt. Ethan sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the message from Jake. He hadn't seen Jake in years, not since they worked together at a warehouse job back in college. The guy had always been resourceful, the type to find ways to make money fast. But he also had a reputation, one that made Ethan hesitate. His phone buzzed again. "Jake, meet me at Leo's diner in an hour. I'll explain in person." Ethan exhaled sharply. Was he really considering this? He didn't have many options. His parents weren't going to contribute a dime, and Emma's part-time job at a cafe would barely make a dent in the $20,000 she owed. Reluctantly, he grabbed his keys and headed out. Leo's diner was the same as Ethan remembered: greasy food, neon lights flickering overhead, and a quiet, almost eerie atmosphere at night. He spotted Jake sitting in the back booth, looking exactly the same: shaggy hair, a cocky grin, and an air of confidence that always made people nervous. "Ethan, my man." Jake grinned as he gestured for him to sit. "Been a while." Ethan slid into the booth. "Yeah, you said you had an opportunity?" Jake leaned in, lowering his voice. "How does $5,000 sound?" "Easy money." Ethan raised an eyebrow. $5,000 for what?" Jake chuckled. "Relax, nothing illegal. Just a little delivery job. Someone needs a package delivered to a client, and they don't trust shipping companies. You take it from point A to point B, you get paid." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What's in the package?" Jake smirked. "That's the part you don't ask about." Ethan immediately tensed. "So it is illegal?" Jake shrugged. "Not necessarily. Could be documents, could be rare collectibles, could be other things. Point is, it's a one-time gig, and you walk away $5,000 richer." Ethan leaned back, weighing his options. His gut told him this was a bad idea. But $5,000 in one night? That was more than he could make in months at his regular job. He thought about Emma, about the looming deadline. "How risky is it?" Ethan asked carefully. Jake smirked. "As long as you keep your head down and don't ask questions, it's no risk at all." Ethan's mind raced. He didn't want to get involved in anything shady, but he was running out of time. His sister was depending on him, and even though he resented the situation, he couldn't let her get hurt. "I'll think about it," Ethan finally said. Jake laughed. "Don't think too long. The offer won't be on the table forever." As Ethan left the diner, his stomach twisted with unease. He had no idea that this one decision would change everything, and not in the way he expected. Ethan barely slept that night. His mind raced with every possible outcome of Jake's offer. $5,000 would be a lifesaver, but was it worth the risk? If it was just some high-end package delivery, why did it have to be so secretive? By morning, he still hadn't decided. But the weight of Emma's debt and his own dwindling savings left him with little choice. At noon, he texted Jake. "Ethan, I'm in. What's the plan?" A minute later, Jake replied with an address and a time. "Jake, warehouse on 7th and Lincoln. 8 p.m. Be on time. Don't be seen." That last part sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He ignored the warning signs and convinced himself it was just nerves. After all, it was just one delivery. How bad could it be? At 8 p.m. sharp, Ethan pulled into the back alley behind the warehouse. The area was quiet, too quiet. His gut told him to turn around, but he had already committed. Jake emerged from the shadows, carrying a black duffel bag. "Glad you made it," he said, handing Ethan the bag. "What's inside?" Ethan asked, gripping the handles tightly. Jake smirked. "I told you not to ask." Ethan scowled but didn't push. "Where's it going?" Jake handed him a slip of paper with an address. "Drop it off there. Guy's expecting it. He'll hand you an envelope with your cash." "That's it." Ethan glanced at the address, an apartment complex across town. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Fine. I'll get it done." Jake patted his shoulder. "That's my guy. Just don't open the bag." As Ethan walked back to his car, his palms were slick with sweat. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to leave the bag on the curb and drive away. But $5,000 was already within his grasp. He tossed the bag onto the passenger seat and pulled out of the alley, heading toward the drop-off location. Halfway there, his curiosity got the best of him. "I should at least know what I'm delivering," he muttered. He pulled into an empty parking lot and carefully unzipped the duffel bag. Inside, he found stacks of cash, bundles upon bundles of $100 bills. His heart pounded. "What the hell?" he whispered. This wasn't just some sketchy package, it was a fortune. Tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. His breathing quickened. This wasn't some simple delivery. This was something big. Was he transporting stolen money? Was this connected to some criminal organization? Panic set in. If he got caught with this, he'd go to jail. Worse, if someone found out he peeked inside, Jake's employers, whoever they were, might come after him. Ethan had two choices. Complete the delivery and take the $5,000. Walk away and return the money, but risk angering dangerous people. His hands trembled as he zipped the bag shut. For the first time, he realized that this wasn't just about money anymore. He was in deep. Too deep. Ethan sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The duffel bag full of cash rested on the passenger seat, like a bomb waiting to go off. His heart pounded against his ribs. This wasn't just some shady deal. This was huge. What if this money was tied to something illegal? Drug deals? Laundering? A robbery? The thought made his stomach churn. If he went through with the delivery, he'd be part of something much bigger than he could handle. But if he backed out now, what would Jake and his people do to him? For a brief moment, the idea of keeping the money crossed his mind. But that was stupid. People didn't just lose this much cash. Someone would come looking for it. He exhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. Option 1, complete the job, take the $5,000, and get out. Option 2, turn around and walk away, but at what cost? His instincts screamed at him to leave it all behind. But his sister, Emma, was still drowning in debt, and his parents were counting on him. Ethan had to make a choice. After what felt like an eternity, he forced himself to drive to the address Jake had given him. It led into a rundown apartment complex in the rough part of town. The street was dimly lit, the buildings covered in graffiti, and the air smelled like smoke and damp concrete. He pulled up to the curb, scanning the area. A man stood near the entrance, hood pulled low over his face. As Ethan stepped out of the car with the duffel bag, the man turned to him. "You got it?" the man asked, his voice low and rough. Ethan nodded and handed over the bag, his pulse hammering in his ears. The man unzipped it slightly, confirming the contents. Satisfied, he pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Ethan. $5,000. Like Jake promised, he said before turning and walking into the building. Ethan stared at the envelope, his fingers shaking. This was it. It was over. Or so he thought. As he walked back to his car, the sound of screeching tires made him freeze. A black SUV sped around the corner, headlights glaring like spotlights. Before he could react, the SUV skidded to a stop, and two men jumped out. One grabbed the man who had taken the bag, shoving him against the wall. The other turned toward Ethan. "Hey, stop," one of them shouted. Panic surged through Ethan as he bolted for his car. His hands fumbled with the keys, adrenaline surging through his veins. A gunshot rang out. Ethan ducked, heart slamming against his chest. He didn't wait to see what was happening. He threw himself into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and floored it. His tires screeched against the pavement as he sped away, his breath coming in ragged gasps. What had he just gotten himself into? As he raced through the empty streets, Ethan knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not even close. Ethan barely managed to steady his hands on the wheel as he navigated the chaotic streets. His heart raced, the adrenaline coursing through him like wildfire. Every few seconds, he glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that black SUV chasing after him. He finally pulled over to the side of the road, his mind racing with thoughts of what just happened. Was that man okay? The sight of the gunshot echoed in his mind, a cold reminder of how quickly everything could spiral out of control. Ethan had just wanted to help his family, to fix their financial mess, and now he was tangled up in something much darker than he had ever imagined. As he caught his breath, he thought about the envelope still resting in the passenger seat. $5,000 was nothing to scoff at, but was it worth the risk? And what about the man he'd handed the bag to? Had he just been caught in the crossfire? Ethan's stomach twisted at the thought. He could already imagine the headlines, "Local man caught up in drug deal gone wrong." Feeling the weight of the envelope in his pocket, he decided to head back to his apartment, where he could think and regroup. When he arrived, Ethan stepped inside his apartment and locked the door behind him, his pulse finally beginning to slow. He sank down on the couch, placing the envelope on the table in front of him. The weight of it felt heavy, almost suffocating. He thought about his family. Emma's debts were mounting, and his parents had put their trust in him to make things better. But with each passing moment, Ethan felt the gulf between him and his family widening. This was not the man he wanted to be. He was becoming someone they would never recognize. He picked up the envelope and opened it, counting the cash. 5 crisp $1,000 bills stared back at him. The money felt tainted, almost dirty, after everything that had just transpired. He needed to make a decision and make it fast. As the hours passed, Ethan wrestled with his conscience. He couldn't let this money change him. He knew he had to face his family sooner rather than later. They deserved to know the truth, but he feared how they would react. After a couple of hours of pacing and second-guessing himself, he picked up his phone and dialed Emma's number. "Ethan, I was just thinking about you," she exclaimed, relief evident in her voice. "Can we talk? It's important." "Sure, come over." When Ethan arrived at his sister's apartment, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, her face drawn and tired. The toll of her financial burdens was evident in the way she slouched in her chair. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. Ethan took a deep breath, preparing himself for the storm he knew was coming. "I need to talk to you about what's been going on. With Mom and Dad." Emma nodded, her expression turning serious. "First, I want to say that I've been trying to help out as much as I can, but it feels like they're only putting more pressure on me. I did something risky today," he began, carefully avoiding the specifics of the gunfire. "What do you mean?" she asked, eyes wide. "I helped them out financially, and I thought it would fix everything, but I realized they don't appreciate it. They never have. I'm tired of being their fallback plan," Ethan said, the weight of his emotions spilling out. Emma looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean? They're our parents. We have to support them." "I know, but at what cost? They've put so much on my shoulders without even acknowledging it. And when I said no to their vacation request, they kicked me out," he continued, his voice rising. "That's not fair," she whispered, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Ethan's heart ached for her, realizing she was just as trapped as he was. "I'm scared, Emma. I don't want to get dragged into something I can't control. I don't want to be a part of this family mess anymore." He held up the envelope, the cash almost glowing in the dim light. "This money doesn't feel right. I think I should give it back." Emma stared at him, disbelief etched on her face. "You can't be serious. We need that money." "I know," Ethan replied softly. "But if this is the cost of helping them, I'm out." As Ethan and Emma sat in silence, the gravity of their conversation sank in. The family bond was fraying, and the two siblings realized they would have to decide what family truly meant to them. In that moment, Ethan made a choice. He would no longer allow himself to be a crutch for his family. It was time to reclaim his life, no matter the consequences. "I think it's time we start standing up for ourselves," Ethan said, determination surging through him. Emma nodded slowly, her expression softening. "I'm with you." It was a small comfort, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Ethan's resolve solidified as he left Emma's apartment that evening. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he felt a newfound sense of empowerment. He had decided to reclaim his life and distance himself from the toxic dynamics of his family. Over the next few days, Ethan's thoughts revolved around the changes he wanted to make. He knew he had to confront his parents, not only for himself but for Emma as well. He couldn't allow them to manipulate him or use guilt to control their actions. It was time to lay everything on the table. Ethan spent hours mentally preparing for the conversation he knew he had to have with his parents. He wanted to express how their actions affected him without escalating into a heated argument. He wanted them to understand his perspective. As he sat at his kitchen table, he thought back to the countless times he had covered bills and sent money to help out. Each time, it felt like a Band-Aid on a much larger wound. The cycle had to stop. With a deep breath, he decided to invite them over for dinner. If they were going to have this conversation, it needed to be face-to-face. "Mom, Dad, can you come over for dinner this Friday?" Ethan said when he called them later that week. "I want to talk about some things." "Sure, Ethan. What's on your mind?" His mother replied, sounding cheerful. "Just some family stuff." "It's important," he replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Okay. We'll be there at 6, she said. Hanging up the phone, Ethan felt a mix of anticipation and dread. He knew this conversation would be pivotal for him and Emma. It was the moment they would reclaim their autonomy. When Friday arrived, Ethan spent the day preparing. He cooked a simple meal of pasta and garlic bread, trying to keep his mind off the impending confrontation. When the doorbell rang, he felt a surge of anxiety mixed with determination. He opened the door to see his parents, smiling as they stepped inside. "Hey, Ethan. This smells wonderful," his father exclaimed, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Thanks, Dad. Have a seat. We have a lot to discuss," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. As they sat down to eat, the atmosphere felt tense. Ethan watched his parents share stories, laughing as if everything was normal, but he knew better. "Can we talk about something serious?" Ethan asked, setting his fork down. His parents exchanged glances, the laughter dying down. "Of course, son. "What's on your mind?" his mother asked, her tone shifting to concern. Ethan took a deep breath. "I want to talk about the financial support I've been giving you and how it's impacting me." His father frowned. "What do you mean? You're helping your family out, and we appreciate it. But at what cost?" Ethan pressed, his voice rising. "I feel like I'm being taken for granted. Every time I say no, I'm met with anger and guilt. I can't keep living like this." His mother's expression changed, confusion and hurt flickering across her face. "Ethan, we've always supported each other. We thought you wanted to help." "I did want to help, but it shouldn't feel like a burden," Ethan exclaimed, frustration pouring out. "When you kicked me out on Thanksgiving for not paying for your vacation, I realized that I'm not your last resort anymore. I deserve respect." The silence hung heavy in the air, and Ethan could see the shock on their faces. His father's expression hardened, and he leaned back in his chair. "You're being dramatic. We're family, and family helps each other." "Yes, but family also respects boundaries." Ethan shot back, feeling empowered. "I can't keep sacrificing my well-being for the sake of your demands. It's time for you both to take responsibility for your actions." His mother's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "We didn't mean to make you feel that way. We just wanted to make things better for everyone." Ethan's heart softened for a moment, but he pressed on. "It's too late for apologies. I'm not a safety net anymore. From now on, I'm focusing on my own life, and I won't be sending you money or helping out anymore." "Ethan, you can't just abandon your family," his father shouted, anger flaring in his voice. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm taking back my life. You both need to understand the consequences of your actions," Ethan replied, feeling resolute. As the evening wore on, the conversation grew heated. Ethan stood his ground, refusing to be swayed by their guilt trips and manipulation. He could feel the rift between them widening, but it was a necessary step toward liberation. Finally, his parents left, their faces a mixture of anger and confusion. As the door closed behind them, Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had taken a stand, not only for himself but for Emma too. No longer would he allow their actions to dictate his happiness. In the following days, Ethan reflected on his decision. He felt empowered and free. Though the future was uncertain, he was ready to embrace it on his own terms. With Emma's support, they began to build a new life free from the burden of their past. Together, they would forge a new path, one that prioritized their well-being, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt hopeful. The confrontation had been difficult, but it marked the beginning of their liberation from the toxic ties that had held them back for so long. In the end, they learned that standing up for oneself often leads to unexpected strength, and that real family support means respecting each other's boundaries. Ethan was finally ready to step into his future, one that was defined by his choices and not the expectations of others.